The doctor said she had less than a 20% chance. The treatment would cost nearly $50,000. My siblings didn't cry, didn't fight. They just said one sentence and left. Don't throw money into a black hole. But I stayed. I drained my savings. I worked the night shift. I watched her heartbeat for 22 nights. She opened her eyes and whispered, "Still here," and I nodded. They never came back. Until the funeral. They posted filtered tributes online. "Rip Queen. Heaven gained an angel." Then they asked the real question. Is there a will? There was. And what they didn't know was that Mom left everything to the one who stayed. They called it a mild cardiac episode. That was the phrase the ER doctor used when I rushed my mother into Boise General on a cold Tuesday morning in January. But it wasn't mild. Not to me. Not when I found her collapsed in the kitchen, clutching her chest with her lips pale and her eyes glassy. I remember the smell of burned toast still in the air. She had been trying to make breakfast. We got to the hospital just after 7. The sky was still dark, the parking lot glistening with old snow. I hadn't even combed my hair. My hands were shaking as I signed the check-in forms. My mom, Angela Whitman, 63, retired schoolteacher, widow of a man gone too soon and mother of 4. Only one was standing beside her now. I sat in that fluorescent-lit hallway for nearly 2 hours while they stabilized her. Her breathing was shallow, her heart rate irregular. I overheard phrases like end-stage heart failure, extreme fluid retention, less than 20% ejection fraction. I Googled them while waiting, but the words didn't feel real until Dr. Hendricks, tall and unsmiling, asked me to step into a room with 3 chairs and a tissue box. "She needs intensive care," he said plainly. "Full cardiac support. There is a chance for recovery, but it's slim. Maybe 20%. The treatment would be aggressive and expensive. The estimate's around $48,000. Without intervention, she won't survive the week." I couldn't speak. That afternoon, the rest of them arrived. Judith first, with her carefully wrapped scarf and the same tight-lipped expression she always wore at funerals and family events. Then Bradley, still in his banking suit, Bluetooth in one ear, checking his phone between sentences. Lacey came last, in sunglasses, coffee in hand, talking about the drama she missed at her last influencer brunch. We stood in the family consultation room like strangers. Dr. Hendricks went over the details again. The risks, the costs, the odds. He was professional. Detached. Like he'd delivered this speech 1,000 times and didn't expect a different outcome. Judith crossed her arms and glanced at Bradley. Lacey didn't even look up from her phone. Judith spoke first. "So we're talking about spending close to 50 grand for a maybe," Bradley added. "If she pulls through, what kind of quality of life are we looking at? She hasn't been healthy in years." Lacey shrugged. "I love Mom, but this sounds like keeping someone alive just to suffer longer." I stared at them. "Are you serious?" I asked. "She's not a project to abandon. She's our mother." Judith exhaled slowly. "Rachel, I know you're emotional, but we have to be rational. This kind of treatment, it's a black hole." Bradley nodded. "We could be bankrupting the estate for nothing." "She's not dead," I said louder than I intended. "She's scared. Alone. And you're already talking about her as if she's gone." Lacey finally looked up. "You think she'd want this tubes machine's debt? She told me once she never wanted to be a burden." "She's not a burden," I said through clenched teeth. But the decision was already made. Judith gave a soft sigh, walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder like a judge issuing a sentence. "We'll step out. Call us when there's news." And just like that, they left. No hugs. No arguments. No second thoughts. I watched their backs as they disappeared down the corridor. The elevator doors closed and I was alone. A nurse came over quietly. "Are you Rachel Whitman?" I nodded, still staring at the empty hallway. "We'll need someone to sign the financial responsibility forms. What your mother's insurance only covers part of the cost. About 20%. For full treatment, we'll need out-of-pocket authorization. Otherwise, we'll move to palliative care." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the wall. Do you want a moment to think number? I reached for the clipboard. My hands were trembling. But I signed every page. The ink looked thin on the paper, as if it could disappear under pressure. $48,000. I had about 18 in savings meant for a second degree I'd never started. The rest would have to come from loans, part-time jobs, miracles. After I handed back the forms, I went downstairs to HR. I asked for anything. Reception, file clerk, supply runner. Even janitorial. Whatever had flexible hours. Whatever would keep me close. By 4 p.m., I was hired for a temp admin shift on the night rotation. By 6 p.m., I was back in the ICU holding my mother's hand, trying not to let her see the fear sitting in my throat. She didn't open her eyes that night. Or the next. But I didn't leave. I slept in the hospital chair for 19 nights. Not the recliner, some rooms had just the molded plastic kind with one arm higher than the other and a tilt that forced your back into a shape it wasn't built for. I used my coat as a blanket, a balled-up hoodie as a pillow, and the sound of the IV pump as my lullaby. Every night I watched the numbers on the monitor like they were holy. I didn't understand all of them, but I knew the difference between steady and slipping. The nurses stopped asking if I was going home. By the end of week 1, someone slipped me a spare blanket from the pediatric wing. By week 2, I had a badge with after-hours clearance. By week 3, Nurse Darlene started bringing me coffee with cream and half a sugar, just the way she said her daughter liked it. She didn't speak much, but she always nodded at me like I was doing something brave. On the 22nd morning, my mother opened her eyes. It was just a flicker at first. I nearly missed it because I was half asleep, my head resting near her hand. But then her fingers twitched and I sat up straight. Her lips parted dry and cracked. I grabbed the cup of ice chips and touched one gently to her mouth. Her voice was barely more than air. Still here, I nodded. Tears filled my throat before they reached my eyes. I pressed her fingers between mine, careful not to disturb the IV line. Always. She tried to smile. It looked like a flinch, but I knew what it meant. I didn't call anyone. Not Bradley, not Judith, not Lacey. They had made their decision. This moment belonged to us. The doctors were stunned. The one who'd said her odds were less than 1 in 5 shook his head and muttered about statistical anomalies. They adjusted her meds, ran more tests, and moved her out of ICU by day 25. I packed my things into a duffel and moved into a studio apartment 2 blocks from the hospital. It was tiny, barely more than a closet with a stove, but it had a window and a view of the parking garage. And it meant I could run back anytime. I kept working the night admin shifts. Filing, chart delivery, sometimes ordering supplies. It wasn't glamorous, but it covered groceries and rent and left me just enough time to sit with Mom in the afternoons. She didn't ask where the others were. She asked about my job, about what I ate, about how the nurses were treating me. But not once did she say their names. One afternoon, as I helped her with her hair, she watched me in the mirror and said softly, "Some people love when it's easy. When it costs them nothing. You're not one of those people." I paused, my hands full of pins and her silver strands. I didn't know what to say, so I just kept twisting and tucking. She reached up and touched my wrist. "Thank you for not leaving." I swallowed hard. The room smelled like hospital soap and peppermint lotion, and I remember thinking I'd never forget that exact combination. Darlene started bringing dinner for 2. She said she made too much, but I knew better. Mom adored her mashed potatoes, and I learned how to make them just the way she liked. We played dominoes when her hands stopped shaking, and I read to her in the evenings. Mostly old books from her teaching days. Sometimes she fell asleep halfway through a chapter, and I'd keep reading anyway, my voice soft, just to keep the silence company. One night she asked me to open the drawer by her bed. Inside was a photo of us taken years ago on a school field trip. I was maybe 10. She had her arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning, wind in our hair. She looked younger, stronger. But the love on her face in that picture wasn't any different from the way she looked at me now. "I should have told you sooner," she whispered. "You've always been the quiet one, but I saw everything. I just didn't know how to thank you for being the one who never asked for anything." "You don't have to thank me," I said. But I did. For the next week, we talked more than we had in years. About childhood memories I had half forgotten. About her favorite books, her regrets, the places she had wanted to visit but never did. She mentioned a box she kept at home with letters and documents. Told me not to worry about it yet, but that I should know it was there. The silence from the others stretched on. Not a single call. Not a single message. Mom didn't ask again. Neither did I. It was just us now. And that was enough. When they finally cleared her to go home, it had been 94 days since the ambulance ride. Mom was thin and slow-moving, but her mind was sharp and her sarcasm still intact. The doctors called it an unexpected recovery. I called it proof of what staying means. We took a cab from the hospital to the apartment. I held her hand the whole way, even when she pretended not to need it. The driver helped carry her bag upstairs. She nodded politely and muttered something about not liking being fussed over. I had already rearranged the apartment, cleared space near the window for her recliner, and set up a small side table for her tea and books. That night, she insisted on sitting up to watch the local news. I brought her dinner on a tray: grilled chicken and mashed potatoes. She took one bite and gave me a look. Too much pepper. I smiled. I'll fix it tomorrow. She smiled back, and that was all we needed. I hired a part-time nurse named Gwen, a kind woman in her early 50s who used to work hospice but said she preferred the living. Gwen came 3 mornings a week, just enough so I could keep my hospital job and get some sleep. She brought crossword puzzles and a gentle calm that filled the apartment like warm light. In the quiet days that followed, I started remembering the parts of our life I hadn't thought about in years. Like how Mom worked 3 jobs when we were kids. Morning receptionist at a dental clinic, afternoon shift at the library, and weekend cleaning gigs. She used to come home with cracked knuckles and red eyes, but she still made time to quiz me on spelling words. Judith opened her flower shop because Mom co-signed the business loan. When the first winter hit and sales tanked, it was Mom who paid the lease with her tax return. Bradley lost everything during a stock crash in 2013. Mom sold half the house to pay off his debts and let him move back in. He stayed 2 years rent-free, then left with barely a thank you. Lacey was the youngest and the loudest. She moved out, moved back, and moved out again. By 29, she was still living in the basement and using Mom's credit card for DoorDash and acrylic nails. I remember Mom telling me once that Lacey needed more time. That some kids take longer to grow up. None of them had asked how she was doing. Not even a card. One afternoon, I was folding laundry on the couch when Darlene dropped by. She had just gotten off her shift and brought banana bread wrapped in foil. Mom was dozing, and we sat in the kitchen drinking instant coffee. "You know what I've noticed," she said, stirring her cup slowly. "A lot of people say they love someone until love costs them something." I nodded. She didn't say it with bitterness, just experience. "Sometimes I wonder if we give too many free passes to people who only show up for the photos," I said. Darlene looked at me, her eyes steady. "You're not wrong. But maybe it's not about who didn't show up. Maybe it's about what you showed her by staying." She squeezed my hand once before leaving. That night, as I watched Mom sleep in her recliner, her hand resting on a book she never finished, I thought about the birthdays we'd celebrated with store-bought cake and paper hats. The holidays she stretched every dollar to make feel full. The nights she stayed up sewing costumes for school plays. She had never been grand or loud. Just present. And now when she needed someone most, the people who owed her the most were silent. I checked my phone again. Nothing from Judith. No missed calls. No texts from Bradley. No comments or likes from Lacey, who posted selfies daily but hadn't once asked if Mom survived. Maybe family isn't who you're born with. Maybe it's who chooses to stay. Maybe that word family means less when it's said out of habit and not heart. Mom stirred and blinked at me. "You thinking again?" "A little." She smiled faintly. "You always think too much when it's quiet." I tucked a blanket around her legs and sat down next to her. "The thing is," I whispered, "I don't even think they're bad people. I think they're just tired of responsibility that doesn't come with praise." She chuckled dryly. "Sounds about right." We sat in silence a while longer, the hum of the fridge the only sound. Outside, snow had started to fall again. The world kept moving, but inside our little apartment everything had slowed just enough to feel. And for the first time in a long time I stopped hoping they'd come around. I started building a life without them in it. Snow had started to fall again the morning I realized my routines had become a life. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for a call. Not for reconciliation. Not for anything to change. I cooked for two because I wanted to. I took my mom's vitals every morning because it gave me peace. I read to her at night because the silence wasn't so heavy when it had a voice in it. Somewhere in the quiet rhythms of caregiving, I stopped feeling like a daughter trying to prove something and started simply being present. Mom moved slower by then. Her steps were soft, her breathing sometimes shallow, but she still smiled at birds on the windowsill and asked me to pick up her favorite strawberry jam from the corner store. Gwen still came by 3 times a week to help with bathing and meds. The rest I handled. I wanted to. Each morning, I would watch Mom settle into her recliner by the window, her fingers curled gently around a paperback mystery she had read 4 times. She never seemed to mind rereading stories. She said good books were like kind people worth spending time with again and again. On days when her legs ached, I massaged her calves with lavender oil. When she couldn't sleep, I played piano instrumentals softly from my phone and sat by her side. One night during a particularly bad storm, the lights flickered and the power went out. I lit 3 candles, made instant soup over the gas burner, and we played cards by candlelight. She beat me every hand and laughed so hard she had to catch her breath. I don't need much, she said that night, staring at the dancing flames. Just to know someone's here, and I was. Every single day. Judith sent a holiday card in December. It arrived 2 weeks late, no return address, no personal note, just Judith in swirling ink at the bottom of a generic message about warmth and cheer. I tossed it in the trash. Lacey never called, not on Thanksgiving. Not on Christmas, not even on Mom's birthday in March. Bradley was a ghost. His last known address was sold to a rental company. The silence from all of them had become permanent, and surprisingly it no longer stung. Sometimes Gwen would pause during her visits and ask if they ever reached out. I'd just shake my head and she never pushed. Once she brought over a bouquet of tulips and said flowers shouldn't wait for funerals. Mom's health was steady, then slow. Like a clock winding down gently rather than breaking. She had less energy by spring, often napping in the afternoon, sometimes forgetting where she placed her reading glasses. But her eyes still lit up when I brought home blueberry muffins, and she still called me sweetheart in the soft way only she could. I remember one afternoon in May she called me over without warning, held my hand and said, "I want to talk about the letters." "What letters?" "In the lockbox under my bed. The ones with my name on them. There's a folder too. With instructions. Frank helped me organize it." Frank Molina, her lawyer. I nodded, a little uneasy. "You don't have to open them yet," she said. "But I want you to know they're real. I want you to know I thought about it." I squeezed her hand. "Okay, I hear you." She smiled and let her eyes fall shut. That was enough for her. The last week of her life was quiet, peaceful, almost unnervingly so. She stopped asking for coffee. Her books remained untouched on the side table. She dozed more often, spoke less, but when she did, it was gentle things like, "Isn't the sky lovely today?" or "I dreamed about your father last night." He was younger again. I stayed home that week, called out of work without guilt. I sat beside her through the slow days and cooler nights, adjusting pillows, brushing her hair, tucking her hands into mine. Then came that final night. It had snowed earlier, leaving the streets hushed and the sky pale gray. I came home with her favorite peppermint tea, a scarf I found at a thrift store, and a chocolate bar shaped like a heart. I remember being excited to show her the scarf, thinking she might wear it, even if just for a minute. The apartment was warm. The lamp beside her chair was on. A book rested open on her lap, her glasses sliding down her nose. She looked peaceful, like she had fallen asleep while waiting for me to return. I called her name. She didn't answer. I stepped closer and reached out to touch her hand. It was cool but not stiff. Her chest wasn't rising. There was no pain in her face. No sign of struggle. Just stillness, soft and final. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I sat down on the floor beside her, rested my head against her knee, and let the quiet wrap around us like a blanket. The book was open to chapter 12. Her cup of tea sat untouched. A single snowflake had melted on the window pane, leaving a faint trail like a farewell. After some time, I stood and called Pastor Joel. Then I called Frank Molina. I told them both, she's gone. Frank's voice was steady, gentle. He said he'd come by the next morning, that he had everything in place per her request. I placed the scarf I'd brought beside her chair. I turned off the kettle, closed her book, and folded the blanket across her lap. I wrote the date on a sticky note and slid it into the book like a quiet bookmark. There were no calls from anyone else. No late-night messages, no questions, no sudden appearances. Only the soft ticking of the clock, the snow falling outside, and a stillness that filled the room without making it empty. She was gone. But I could feel deep in my chest that her story wasn't finished. Not yet. The morning after she passed, I lit a candle and sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The world outside moved on as if nothing had changed. Buses ran, children walked to school, bundled in jackets, someone across the street shoveled their driveway. But inside our apartment, time had stopped. I waited until the sun came fully up before sending the message. It wasn't poetic or emotional, just a quiet notification to the family group thread we hadn't used in months. Mom passed peacefully last night. I didn't expect replies. I didn't want them. But part of me thought maybe, just maybe, one of them would call. Ask something. Say anything. I got silence. Then around noon my phone buzzed. Not a text, a notification. Lacey had posted a photo of Mom on Instagram. A black and white close-up taken from some old holiday with a rainbow light filter laid over her shoulders. The caption read, "Rip Queen. Heaven gained an angel." Underneath, the comments flooded in. People I hadn't heard from in years left hearts and teardrop emojis. Someone wrote, "She raised such an amazing daughter." I doubt they even knew which one. Judith had left a comment too. "We'll never forget her love." I stared at the post for a long time. My hand shook as I scrolled. Photo after photo of Lacey posing with coffee or by fountains, nothing about Mom for months, and suddenly she had turned her absence into a spotlight, grief as content, likes as comfort. I closed the app and dropped the phone on the table. There was so much I wanted to say, but none of it would have changed what they were. Or weren't. I met with Pastor Joel that afternoon to finalize the funeral details. Mom had always been clear about what she wanted. No grand service. No flowers with price tags bigger than utility bills. Just people who cared, a few words of comfort and enough quiet to be honest. Frank Molina confirmed he would attend. He said Mom had everything arranged in her final directive. That she'd prepared it all in advance with clarity and intention. I felt relief and grief twist together inside me like a knot too tight to undo. The chapel at St. Luke's was small, warm, and quiet. I chose a photo of Mom taken just last fall. She was wearing a green sweater I had knit for her, holding a cup of tea by the window. Her smile wasn't posed. Just real. Present. I printed 10 programs, folded them by hand the night before. Only a few people came. Darlene was the first. She brought banana muffins and hugged me so tightly my ribs ached. 3 of our old neighbors from Sandpiper Lane showed up with potted plants and stories I hadn't heard in years. Pastor Joel spoke simply. His words weren't flowery, just honest. He said love is measured not by how loudly we grieve, but by how quietly we stay. As we neared the end of the service, the doors creaked open. I turned. Judith entered first, wearing a slate gray coat, her heels echoing across the wooden floor. Her face was unreadable. Behind her came Bradley, a few steps slower, carrying a bouquet of white lilies still in the grocery store plastic wrap. They didn't look at me. They scanned the room, no doubt surprised by how few chairs were filled. Judith slid into the back pew. Bradley followed. Neither spoke during the last hymn. After the service, as I stood by the front table collecting the programs and rearranging the candles, they approached. Judith's voice was calm, too calm. "Rachel, it was. A lovely service. Simple, just like she would have wanted. I didn't answer. Bradley held out the lilies. These are for the memory table. I nodded and took them. The plastic crinkled in my hands. They exchanged a glance before Judith stepped closer. So I imagine there must be some estate documents. A will, maybe. She was always organized. You'd know. Her tone was light, like she was asking about grocery lists. I looked her in the eye. She made arrangements with her lawyer, Frank Molina. He'll be in touch with everyone soon. Bradley scratched the back of his neck. Oh, well, good. I mean, it's just good to know she had things in order. I know she wouldn't have wanted confusion. I stared at them, wondering how many rehearsals it had taken to say that with a straight face. Judith smiled faintly, that same tight-lipped expression I remembered from every holiday dinner she left early. I'm sure she wanted everything to be fair. I didn't respond. They lingered as if expecting more. Maybe an invitation, maybe a breakdown. I gave them nothing. Darlene walked past, placing her hand gently on my back. I could feel her eyes on them. They noticed too. Bradley mumbled something about being in touch and walked out. Judith followed a moment later, her heels clicking across the tile like punctuation marks on a lie. Outside, the wind had picked up. I stood in the entryway watching their figures disappear into the gray afternoon, their steps as casual as if leaving brunch. Back inside, I folded the last of the programs and placed them neatly into an envelope marked final arrangements. The chapel had emptied. The candles were burned halfway down. But I stayed a little longer. Not to mourn. To prepare. Frank Molina's office smelled like cedar and old books, the kind of scent that wraps around you and says everything in here is documented. The morning sun poured through the tall windows, catching flecks of dust in the air like confetti paused mid-fall. I sat at the far end of the long table, my palms pressed flat against the smooth wood, waiting. Frank entered with the calm efficiency of a man who had done this hundreds of times. Behind him, an assistant carried a small wooden box and a thick folder of documents. Frank gave me a nod, then gestured toward the box as he sat. Your mother prepared everything. Down to the details. He slid the box in front of me. I recognized it instantly. It had been under her bed for months, tucked between old sweaters and a shoe rack. I opened the lid slowly. Inside was a flash drive. A handwritten letter. A folded envelope stamped with the hospital's letterhead, and a small brass key. Frank reached for the flash drive and plugged it into a monitor positioned at the end of the table. The screen flickered, then turned blue. A moment later, my mother's face appeared. She was sitting upright in her recliner, dressed in her green sweater, glasses perched neatly on her nose. She looked right into the camera and smiled. If you're watching this, I've already gone. And if the people I think are in the room are actually in the room, well, I'm not surprised. There was a creak as someone sat down behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Judith's perfume arrived before she did, sharp and synthetic. Bradley muttered a greeting that I ignored. Lacey entered last, her heels clicking lightly across the floor as she took the chair across from me. My mother continued. I, Angela Whitman, being of sound mind and body at the time of this recording, do hereby state that this is my final will and testament. The contents of this will have been reviewed and notarized with full cognitive capacity confirmed by Dr. Emily Hahn at Boise Regional Medical. The documentation is attached. Frank reached into the folder and pulled out a document, sliding it across the table for everyone to see. Cognitive evaluation. Dated 3 weeks before her passing. Full capacity. No signs of manipulation or diminished understanding. On the screen, Mom leaned in slightly. I leave the entirety of my estate, including my home savings accounts, personal belongings, and all items of sentimental or monetary value to my youngest daughter, Rachel Whitman. The room went completely still. Because she stayed. Because she cared when no one else did. Judith shot up from her chair so fast it scraped the floor. This is a scam. Frank didn't flinch. Your mother signed these documents under full legal review. There are timestamps. Witnesses. Medical clearance. This is not up for debate. Lacey's jaw hung open slightly. Bradley leaned back in his chair, blinking like someone had slapped him with a book he hadn't bothered to read. I opened my laptop. I wasn't going to say anything. I had promised myself I wouldn't engage, but my fingers moved on their own. I clicked into Lacey's Instagram story archive and cast the screen to the monitor. There she was, filmed in the chapel during Mom's funeral. Her camera was angled just so, highlighting her cheekbones and freshly applied mascara. Her caption read, "Rest easy, Anna. Heaven's got you now, Queen." Judith inhaled sharply. My mother's name was Angela. The next clip played automatically. Lacey zoomed in on her shoes and whispered, "I swear if I see one more ugly crying neighbor, I'm going to lose it." Then she added a filter with cartoon angel wings. Bradley turned red. I closed the laptop without a word. Frank let the silence sit before clearing his throat. As outlined in the no contest clause within the will, any attempt to challenge this inheritance in court will result in the forfeiture of any and all rights to said estate. Your mother was specific and intentional. There are no alternate beneficiaries. No trust splits. No estate shares. Judith's hands curled into fists. So that's it, we're just cut out. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Mom already had. Frank opened another document. There's also a notarized letter written directly to Rachel with a postscript to be delivered if any disputes arise. He slid it toward me. I left it unopened for now. Bradley looked at the door like he wanted to leave but didn't know how to do it without losing the last shred of dignity he had walked in with. Lacey stood suddenly. Whatever. She was sick. She probably didn't even know what she was saying. Frank tapped the folder gently. Then explained the cognitive clearance. Or the full video testimony. Or the dated journal entries where she detailed every step of her decision. Lacey sank back into her chair. For a moment no one spoke. Then Judith stood again, slower this time. You really think this makes you better than us? I looked up at her. Number. But I know it makes me the one who was there. Frank closed the folder. That concludes the reading of the will. Any further questions can be addressed through legal counsel. They didn't move right away. Eventually, one by one, they stood and left. No hugs. No apologies. No sudden awakenings. Just silence. And the door clicking shut behind them. I sat there a moment longer, staring at the letter with my name on it. Because she cared when no one else did. I reached out and placed my hand over the envelope. Not out of pride, but because I could finally breathe. The folder was still open when Bradley leaned across the table, his voice tight and sharp. This isn't over. His words didn't shake me, not the way they might have once. Not when I was still trying to earn a place in a family that left the moment love required effort. But he wasn't done. We're her children. Blood. That means something. You think a few legal papers erase that? He looked at Frank like the lawyer might suddenly fold and hand him keys to the house, a checkbook, maybe even an apology. Frank stayed quiet, his face unreadable. Judith crossed her arms and tilted her chin up. She was old. Tired. Sick. Anyone could have manipulated her, especially someone who had access every day. You were in her ear constantly. What was she supposed to say? I said nothing. Not yet. Lacey was quieter than the others, but I could feel her eyes on me. Studying, calculating. She was always the one who waited then pounced when she saw an advantage. And right now, she was looking for one. Judith pressed on. We're going to challenge this. I don't care about the video. I don't care about your so-called evaluations. There are lawyers who specialize in these things. Frank finally looked up, his voice even. You are of course entitled to hire counsel. But your mother's will includes a no contest clause. If challenged, you forfeit all rights to the estate. That includes any personal belongings or accounts. Judith blinked. For a second I saw it. The flicker of doubt. Bradley stood, pushing his chair back hard enough to scrape the floor. You can't do this, Rachel. You don't get to rewrite what family means. We were her kids. You were just the one who stayed in the room. I met his eyes. Exactly. He opened his mouth again, but Frank held up a hand and pulled out a second envelope. There's more. He slid it across the table and opened it slowly. Your mother asked me to read this aloud in the event there was confusion. He cleared his throat, then began. If they ask why, show them themselves. Lacey made a sound. Quiet. Almost like a laugh, but bitter. That's all. Frank nodded. That's all she needed. The room was quiet except for the humming air vent in the ceiling. I could feel my heartbeat slow. There was nothing left to say. And yet they all lingered. Bradley broke first. You were always the good girl, weren't you? The one who kept score. Took notes. Waiting for a moment like this. I looked at him, really looked. I didn't keep score, I just didn't walk away when she needed someone. Judith's eyes narrowed. You make yourself sound noble. But what about the rest of us? We had jobs. Families. Responsibilities. So did she. And she still managed to raise 4 kids alone. I stood slowly. You weren't absent because you were busy. You were absent because it was hard, because love wasn't convenient anymore. And I stayed not because it was easy, but because I couldn't bear to let her die thinking none of you cared. Lacey crossed her legs and leaned back, her voice cold. You got your inheritance. Don't act like this is about love. I opened my laptop and tapped a few keys. The screen lit up with Lacey's Instagram story. I hit play. The video from the funeral played, her glossy lips pouting at the camera, captioned with, "Rest easy, Anna." The filter sparkled. She smiled at the lens while people cried in the background. She got Mom's name wrong. Judith went pale. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Lacey snapped the laptop shut. You're cruel. I finally spoke, my voice steady. I'm done pretending we were something we weren't. You want a legacy? Show up when it counts. Bradley looked down. Judith folded her arms tighter. Lacey turned toward the window like she couldn't stand the sight of me. Frank stood. The legal proceedings are complete. Unless you intend to contest and void your claims entirely, I believe we're finished. Judith glared at him. You'll be hearing from someone. She turned and walked out. Bradley followed, his shoulders hunched. Lacey lingered a moment longer. Enjoy it while it lasts. Then she left. I sat back down, the chair creaking beneath me. Frank gathered the papers into his briefcase, then paused. She was proud of you. You know that, right? I nodded. I do. As the door closed behind him, I picked up the letter again, unfolded it, and read her words one more time. I see you. I love you. Don't let them dim that. I pressed the page to my chest, breathing in the faint smell of lavender and old paper. Outside, the office snow had started again. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The key clicked in the lock with a sound that felt final. Not heavy, not sharp. Just complete. I stepped into the house slowly, letting the familiar air wrap around me like a coat I hadn't worn in years. The scent was still there, faint lavender and old wood, and something else too. Time. The living room looked exactly the same. The same blue throw blanket folded neatly on the corner of the couch. The same framed photo of us, from the community fair in '09, crooked as always. Her slippers were still by the back door. I stood there for a long moment, not moving. Not ready yet. Eventually, I made my way to the kitchen. The fridge hummed softly. A calendar on the wall still marked the last date she'd circled, the 14th of February. Not for Valentine's Day. It had been the day we'd gone to the doctor together. The appointment where the truth had landed without mercy. I placed my purse on the counter and opened the drawer next to the sink almost without thinking. That drawer where she always kept things not important enough to file but too important to lose. Coupons, loose change, a box of matches, her church bulletin. And a notebook. Small, brown leather. Worn at the corners. I pulled it out and turned the pages carefully, not sure what I expected. Recipes, maybe. Old addresses. Grocery lists. Instead, I found pieces of her voice. Judith called today. She needs help with the mortgage again. She only calls when things are bad. No hello. No how are you. Next page. Bradley said he'd come for Thanksgiving. Again. He never does, 3 years now. I set a place anyway. My throat tightened. Then another entry, smaller handwriting. Different tone. Rachel helped me into the chair today. Asked what I wanted for dinner. Didn't assume, just asked. No one's done that in a while. The ink on that one had smeared a little, like maybe her hand had shaken or the pen had caught on the page. I turned a few more pages slowly now. The 3rd of March. Rachel cleaned the whole apartment while I napped. Left a sandwich in the fridge with a note that said, "Hope you're hungry." The 14th of April. We watched the rain together. Didn't talk much. She didn't need to fill the silence, she just stayed. And then on the last page, no date. Just a sentence in the center of the page. She never asked for anything, she just stayed. I didn't realize I was crying until the tears blurred the page. I pressed the notebook to my chest and let myself sink into the chair at the kitchen table, the one she always sat in with her morning coffee. I could almost hear her again humming something half-remembered the way she always did when waiting for water to boil. The silence in the house wasn't empty. It was full. Full of memory, of effort, of small kindnesses no one ever saw but her. This house wasn't just hers. It was her, and now it was mine. But it didn't feel right to just live in it alone. Not anymore. That night I stayed up going through drawers and files, boxes of papers she'd kept over the years. Bills, letters, church programs. And hidden in the back of her closet in a box marked with an old Christmas sticker, I found something unexpected. Letters from other women. Older women. Most from the community center she used to volunteer at. Thank you, Angela, for the rides to the clinic. For sitting with me when no one else would. For the hot meals. For treating me like I mattered. She had helped so many people. Quietly. Without fanfare, without needing anything in return. She had lived a life of care. And I realized in that moment I didn't want her work to end with her. I sat at the table, her notebook beside me, and opened my laptop. The Angela Circle. That's what I typed into the search bar, first checking to see if the name was taken. It wasn't. I bought the domain. I made a page. I wrote the mission myself. To support elderly individuals who have been abandoned or forgotten by their families. To create community where there was none. To honor quiet care with action. By morning I had outlined a basic plan. A network of volunteers, meal deliveries, companionship programs. A small fund to help with medications and rides. I used a portion of the inheritance to seed it. Her money. Her spirit. Her name. The Angela Circle wasn't just a tribute, it was a continuation. A promise that she wouldn't be remembered only in filtered photos with captions full of fiction, but in hands held, doors knocked on, and meals shared. When I stood in the doorway the next evening and looked back at the living room, I didn't see an empty house. I saw a beginning. The first post came 3 days later. Judith uploaded a photo of Mom on Facebook, the same one from the fair all those years ago, where Mom was holding a funnel cake and laughing at something out of frame. But the caption underneath was what caught me. Losing our mother has been the most painful experience of our lives. We loved her deeply. Every day in every way. Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments, prayers sent, heart emojis. A few people from the old church commented about how lovely Mom had been, how lucky we were to have had her. Judith replied to each with a teardrop and a thank you. She never mentioned that she hadn't spoken to Mom in over a year. The next day, Lacey posted a TikTok. The video opened with her in soft lighting mascara running just a little set to a piano version of a sad pop song. She spoke softly about grief. About family misunderstandings. About what it's like when your younger sister keeps you from saying goodbye. The comments poured in. Stay strong, Queen. Family can be so toxic. Praying for you and your siblings. I didn't respond. I didn't have to, but it still hit me like a cold wind through an open window. That they could vanish for years, leave her to decline without a call or a visit, and then reshape the narrative with a filter and a few curated words. It wasn't about grief. It was about performance. They didn't want to honor her memory, they wanted to control it. A week passed. Then Frank forwarded me an email. It was from a local reporter, someone from the Boise Post who occasionally covered community issues. She'd received a tip, she wrote, about a possible inheritance dispute involving 3 siblings and a contested will. Would I be open to commenting on the matter? I stared at the email for a long moment. Then I opened my phone, scrolled to my photos, and found the one I'd taken of Mom 3 weeks before she passed. She was sitting by the window in her favorite cardigan, a book in her lap, the light hitting her just right. She had a faint smile on her face, one of those peaceful ones that came when she felt safe, known, and loved. I attached the photo in a reply. Caption: no contest. I never heard back from the reporter. But I didn't need to. The story told itself. That photo made its way online eventually. Someone must have shared it from our community board, or maybe from the Angela Circle's website. Either way, it spread. And with it came whispers. Then conversations. A retired nurse from St. Luke's commented on Judith's post. I worked with Angela during her final year. Only one daughter ever came to visit. Daily. You can guess which one. Others joined in. A neighbor posted about seeing me walk her to her car every morning even when snow covered the steps. A local pastor mentioned how mom always asked prayers for her children, but only one name came up again and again. Mine. Lacey turned off comments. Judith edited her post to remove the caption. Bradley stayed silent. I think even he realized the game wasn't going in their favor anymore. At the grocery store, the pharmacist handed me a bag of vitamins with a quiet nod. I read the letter your mom wrote in the Circle newsletter. You're doing a good thing. A barista at the coffee shop down the block waved off my card. This one's on us, Rachel. Your mom always tipped in cash and smiled at everyone. We remember her. I hadn't realized how many people noticed. Not just the absence of my siblings, but the presence of my mother, the kindness she extended, the legacy she built in silence. The Angela Circle started receiving more messages. Not just from seniors, but from volunteers wanting to help. A retired electrician offered to teach free repair classes. A widowed florist donated arrangements weekly. One letter stood out. It came in a lavender envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. I knew your mother. Not well, but enough to know she was proud of you. Let them play their games. Truth doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs time. There was no name. Just a pressed violet tucked inside. That night I sat at Mom's old desk, her notebook beside me, and updated our website's about page. I added a sentence she'd written once, now etched in my heart. She never asked for anything. She just stayed. And with that, the noise faded into something I could finally let go. Under the yellowing light of the community center's rec room, I stood with my back to the dusty whiteboard, looking out at the 10 folding chairs we'd set up that morning. 9 of them were filled, some by people nervously clutching notebooks, others by volunteers who had shown up with nothing but an open heart and steady hands. I took a slow breath, feeling the nervous flutter I hadn't felt since standing in front of my mother's hospital bed that first night alone. This was the Angela Circle's first care workshop. It wasn't much. The ceiling fan squeaked on every third turn. The coffee pot was older than some of the attendees. But it was ours. The air buzzed with quiet energy, the kind that comes when people arrive carrying stories they aren't yet ready to tell. We started simple. Basic elder care: how to lift someone without hurting your back, how to recognize early signs of stroke, how to feed someone with tremors without taking away their dignity. I shared what I knew from years of doing it every single day with my mom. They asked questions, some clinical, some deeply personal. One woman asked how to respond when someone forgets your name. Another asked what to do when a relative refuses help but clearly needs it. I answered the best I could, not as an expert, just as someone who had stayed. That was the word I kept hearing in my own mind. Stayed. I didn't know that word could weigh so much or hold so many other meanings inside it. Guilt, resentment, pride, love. Near the back sat a girl who looked barely 18. She had thick dark hair tucked under a beanie and a pencil in her hand that she never used. Her name tag read Mila. She didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. Her eyes followed everything like she was memorizing it all for a test no one else could see. After the others had left, thanking me, offering hugs, or asking about next week's session, she lingered. She sat perfectly still, then suddenly stood and approached as I was wiping the board clean with an old t-shirt rag. You said something, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, about how sometimes staying isn't loud. I turned toward her, setting the rag down. Yeah. I think a lot of people confuse care with visibility. Sometimes it's the people you never see who are doing the most. She nodded slowly. I didn't come here for credit, she said. I came because I don't want to feel crazy. I tilted my head gently. You're not. My mom had a brain bleed, she said, eyes locked on a point just past my shoulder. She was in a coma. Everyone told me to walk away. Said she wasn't there anymore. That I was ruining my life waiting around. But you stayed. Mila nodded. A tear welled in one eye but didn't fall. She passed 4 months ago. Never woke up. But I still think maybe she knew. She did. Mila looked at me then like she was searching for some kind of confirmation that I had the right to say that. I pulled a small folded cloth from my bag, one I'd carried since the day we left the hospital. A white handkerchief. It was my mom's. She used it when her hands would shake or when I caught her crying and she'd pretend it was just allergies. It smelled faintly of lavender and starch. I held it out to Mila. She hesitated. What's this for? Not for your tears, I said. For your memory. To remind you that you're not the only one who stayed. And that staying isn't weakness. It's strength most people will never understand. Mila took the cloth in both hands like it might break. Thank you, she whispered. We sat for a while in silence after that. She didn't rush out. I didn't push conversation. The fluorescent lights above us flickered once. I thought about Mom and what she would have said if she'd been standing there. Something soft. Something steady. After Mila left, I finished cleaning up and turned off the projector. I was stacking the chairs when I noticed a small yellow post-it stuck to the side of the whiteboard. It read, "Thank you for making space. Someone who stayed." I smiled and left it there. The following morning, I received an email from one of the workshop attendees. She wanted to volunteer. Said her father had dementia and she wished someone had taught her the things she learned yesterday. That afternoon, another one arrived from a man in his 60s offering to donate a batch of home-cooked meals once a week. By the end of the week, we had 15 new sign-ups, not just participants, helpers, supporters. People who understood not in theory, but in their bones what it meant to be the one left behind with the hard choices and no applause. I made a new page on our website that night, Stories from the Circle. And I knew as I typed the title that this was just the beginning. The inbox pinged around 4 in the afternoon just as I was finishing a batch of welcome packets for the next Angela's Circle session. The subject line read simply Mom. It was from Bradley. For a moment I thought maybe he had sent it by mistake, but when I clicked it open, the message was short. 10 words, no greeting, no signature. Do you have a photo of Mom I could have? It stopped me. Not because of what it asked, but because of what it didn't. No apologies. No anger. No mention of the will or the house or the account. Just a simple question. I didn't answer right away. I sat there staring at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I opened the photo folder on my desktop. I titled it Mom in all caps. Inside were dozens of images, mostly ones I had taken during her final year, her sitting by the window with a book, her sipping tea, while Darlene made jokes, her reaching for my hand when her fingers trembled too much to hold a cup. I chose the one by the window. The afternoon light hit just right. Her cardigan sleeves were pushed up to her elbows and a paperback copy of Tuesdays with Maury rested in her lap. Her glasses were slightly crooked the way she always wore them when she was comfortable. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking out at the world, a tiny smile forming like a secret she wasn't ready to tell. Before attaching it, I scanned one more thing. A page from her notebook. The final one written with her thin looping script. She mattered. Always. No sign-off. No caption. I hit send. He never replied. But there were no more threats. No more emails. No legal letters. No TikToks from Lacey with cryptic captions and piano music. No carefully curated grief posts from Judith angling for sympathy from people who didn't know the truth. The noise just stopped. Frank called the next week. The estate had officially closed. All assets were legally transferred. The paperwork was finalized, filed, and archived. It's done, Rachel, he said. I hope this brings peace. I thanked him. Then asked one more favor. Shred the extra copies of the dispute packet. The one we prepared just in case. He chuckled softly. Already in the bin, he said. You handled this with more grace than most. I don't think it was grace. It was clarity. I had spent years thinking closure came from winning. But it doesn't. It comes from knowing you didn't walk away when it mattered. A few days later, Channel 7 reached out. A producer said someone had submitted the Angela Circle to be featured in their series about local changemakers. They wanted to interview me, maybe even bring cameras to one of the sessions. I turned them down. She seemed surprised. I told her gently that some stories weren't meant for television. That some love didn't need a spotlight to be real. That same evening, I walked past the framed photo of Mom in the hallway and paused. I could still smell faint traces of her lavender lotion on the old armchair cover. Her calendar was still pinned to the kitchen wall, the date frozen on the last day she was able to lift a pen. Pastor Joel dropped by the following Saturday. He came bearing a cherry pie from Haven Street Bakery and a newspaper clipping I hadn't seen. It was from the Boise Daily Tribune, a quiet little article naming the Angela Circle as one of the most impactful new community initiatives of the year. I didn't even know we'd been nominated. Joel asked to sit for a moment, so I made tea. He looked around the living room, now filled with evidence of motion. Books stacked for upcoming classes, notes from students, flyers pinned to corkboards. A ripple of purpose in every corner. He sipped his tea and leaned forward. Angela didn't leave behind a monument, Rachel. She left something better. A second heart. And she put it in you. My throat caught. I didn't try to speak. He reached across the table and rested his hand on mine, warm and weathered. You carried her. Not just through illness, but through legacy. That's something no will can define. After he left, I walked through the house slowly, taking in everything with new eyes. The chipped windowsill she used to rest her elbows on. The drawer where she kept handwritten recipes. The notepad by the fridge where she wrote my name just to feel like I was always nearby. Later that night, I found myself at my desk again. A new email had come in. This one from a local college student who'd heard about the Angela Circle through her grandmother's church. She wanted to volunteer. Said her parents weren't speaking to her after she decided to take time off school to care for her grandfather. She ended her message with one line. I heard what you did. I just needed to know I wasn't the only one. I replied with 3 words. You're not alone. Then I attached the flyer for our next workshop. Some people want the world to watch them win. But the truth is you don't have to win to be right. You just have to stay. And keep building. Every morning at 7, I brewed the same black tea my mother used to drink. I didn't do it for nostalgia. I did it because that first sip grounded me, reminded me that life kept going even when parts of it no longer walked beside me. The apartment hadn't changed much. The chipped tile near the sink was still chipped. The window shades still rolled up too fast if I let go too suddenly. But the walls were fuller now. On one side, I had taped up a timeline of the Angela Circle's progress. Color-coded sticky notes mapped out upcoming events, volunteer rotations, and outreach goals. A chart of impact stories hung nearby, each name carefully handwritten, each photo a small reminder that someone had felt seen. On the kitchen table, her notebook sat open. Always open. The cover was soft now from years of use, the corners curled like leaves in late fall. I didn't need to read it anymore. I had every line memorized. But I still found myself returning to the last page often, as if the ink might shift, as if her voice might reach through the paper and settle in the room beside me. You cared. You stayed. It's yours now. I traced the words with my fingertip. Not to feel closer to her, but to feel steadier in myself. That sentence had become more than memory. It had become instruction. Outside, Boise was warming into spring. Daffodils were starting to poke through the sidewalk edges on Jefferson Street. The bakery down the block had their door propped open for the first time in months. Everything was quiet in the way you want it to be after too much noise. The doorbell rang at 9:10. Mila was early, again. She carried 2 canvas bags filled with donated gloves and hand sanitizer and a grin that still looked surprised to belong somewhere. I waved her in. She dropped the bags on the entry bench and turned toward the bulletin board. We got the funding, she said. I blinked. What? The grant. The application we sent to the Shiloh Community Fund, therein. $10,000. Fully approved. I stood frozen for a second, then laughed a sound that came from somewhere deep in my chest. We hugged in the kitchen, neither of us knowing what to say, just breathing and laughing and exhaling weeks of waiting. That night, I stayed up sketching a new program. We'd add more caregiver training, expand transportation assistance, maybe even pilot a summer intern program for local high school seniors. The Angela Circle wasn't just surviving. It was blooming. I pulled out the drawer beside the stove and retrieved the pocket calendar my mom had used for over a decade. Flipping to June, I wrote one small word across the first Sunday. Forward. 2 days later, I visited the cemetery alone. I brought daisies and a copy of the funding approval letter. I sat in the grass, tucked the letter beneath the smooth river stone I had placed at the foot of her marker months earlier, and just breathed. I told her everything. I told her about Mila and the grant, and the way people were beginning to say her name in rooms she never thought she'd reach. I told her about the student who had built a wheelchair sensor and the grandmother who said the circle had saved her life. And then I said thank you. Not for what she left me, but for showing me how to build a life with what others leave behind. The next weekend, we hosted a garden cleanup at the east end of the city. It wasn't much. A patch of land behind an old church, some broken benches, a few raised planters overtaken by weeds. But we made it beautiful again. Volunteers came. Students brought their parents, elders brought their neighbors. Someone played music through a tiny speaker. And when the sun began to dip, Mila found me sitting on the edge of a planter with dirt under my nails and a full heart. "You think she would have liked this?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. She would have loved it. At the end of the day, I stood back and looked around. A garden that had been forgotten was now blooming. A program born from silence had grown loud with impact. And a daughter who had once been left behind was now exactly where she was supposed to be. This wasn't about revenge. It never really was. It was about truth, about dignity, about loving without needing a witness, about staying when others leave, about choosing to matter even when no one gives you permission. If you've ever been the one who stayed when it would have been easier to go when others turned their backs and called it practical, I want you to know this. You are not alone. You are not small. You are not forgotten. You are the reason something beautiful still grows. And if this story found you at the right time, leave a comment. Tell me about the moment you chose to stay. Because kindness is not weakness. And when we stay, we change everything.